At 15,000 feet above the ground, a packed passenger plane began to fall. The captain's voice came over the speakers, shaking, broken, already sounding like goodbye. Grown adults cried, prayed, and held their loved ones, because the pilot believed there was no way out. But while fear swallowed the cabin, a teenage girl unbuckled her seatbelt and made a decision that would change everything. She refused to accept that this was how everyone on board would die. What happened next was something no one on that plane, and no one watching this story, will ever forget. Before we begin, comment below where you are watching from, and let me know if you would have had the courage to stand up in that moment. The flight itself had started like any other ordinary journey, calm, quiet, and completely forgettable. Passengers settled into their seats, scrolling on phones, sipping drinks, and thinking only about where they would land. In the middle row sat a young girl by the window, headphones on, eyes down, looking like just another bored teenager killing time. To everyone around her, she was invisible, too young to matter, too small to understand anything important. A flight attendant passed by with a polite smile, asking if she needed anything, the same way adults always speak to kids. No one on that plane had the slightest idea that this quiet girl was about to become the most important person on board. What no one around her knew was that flying had never been a mystery to her. It was her normal life. She had grown up around roaring engines and metal wings, spending her childhood in hangars instead of playgrounds. While other kids played games on screens, she studied flight manuals, weather charts, and emergency procedures. Her parents were both professional pilots, and they taught her to respect the sky, not fear it. By her teenage years, she already understood how planes breathe, turn, and survive when things go wrong. She carried this knowledge quietly, hidden behind a young face that made adults underestimate her every time. On this flight, she wasn't just a passenger, she was someone who understood exactly what was at stake. The first warning came without explanation, a sudden deep bang that traveled through the floor and into every seat. Most passengers looked around in confusion, unsure if they had imagined it. But the girl felt it instantly, a vibration that did not belong in a healthy aircraft. She removed her headphones and listened closely, her heart steady but alert. The smooth engine hum had changed, now rough, uneven, wrong in a way only trained ears would notice. Then the cabin lights flickered for just a moment, enough to tighten every chest on board. When she looked out the window, her breath caught, dark smoke streaked behind the wing, and tiny sparks flashed against the sky. In that instant, she knew this was no small problem, and time was already running out. The plane did not ease downward. It dropped, sudden and violent, like the sky had released its grip. Stomachs lifted, screams followed, and overhead panels burst open as oxygen masks fell in rows. Alarms began to howl, sharp and relentless, drowning out every calm thought left in the cabin. Passengers grabbed the masks with shaking hands. Parents pulled them over their children's faces, and prayers filled the air. The girl secured her mask, but kept watching everything, counting seconds, feeling the speed of the fall through her bones. They were descending far too fast, thousands of feet every minute, and there was no sign of recovery. Then the captain spoke again, and this time his voice carried something far worse than fear. It carried surrender. He told them systems had failed, an engine was gone, and control was slipping away. He admitted he did not know if the aircraft could be saved. He asked everyone to prepare themselves and to say their goodbyes. The cabin broke apart emotionally. People sobbed openly, some froze in silence. Others desperately called loved ones. A woman nearby couldn't breathe through panic. A man next to her whispered apologies into his phone. Children cried without understanding why, while adults understood too well. In those moments, death felt certain, heavy, and unavoidable. But as the plane continued to fall, one person refused to accept that ending. While everyone else waited for impact, the girl slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. Her hands trembled, but her mind did not. She stood up in the middle of chaos, choosing action when hope had completely disappeared. As she stepped into the aisle, fear finally noticed her. A flight attendant stood frozen near the emergency exit, tears running down her face, unable to move or think. Passengers shouted for the girl to sit down, telling her this was not the time to wander. One man reached out and grabbed her arm, insisting that adults would handle it, that she was just a child. She pulled free and spoke with a calm that cut through the noise, telling them the adults had already given up. Every step toward the front of the plane felt heavier, the floor shaking beneath her feet as the aircraft struggled to stay alive. She reached the cockpit door and knocked hard, once, then again, louder than the alarms. A voice from inside told her to go back to her seat, saying there was no time for this. She raised her voice and shouted over the chaos, saying she could help, saying she understood what was happening. At first, she was ignored, dismissed as fear talking through a child. But she did not stop. She explained that she had flight experience, that she had trained for emergencies like this. The cockpit went quiet for a moment, just long enough to matter. The door finally opened, revealing a captain drenched in sweat, hands shaking, eyes filled with exhaustion and doubt. Behind him, the co-pilot worked frantically through checklists that no longer felt useful. She met the captain's eyes and told him something he hadn't heard in minutes, that the plane was not finished yet, that some systems were still working, and that giving up now would guarantee the ending everyone feared. In that moment, hope did not return loudly. It returned as a question, and the captain, with nothing left to lose, decided to listen. Inside the cockpit, chaos ruled every second, warning lights flashing, alarms screaming, hands moving without direction. The captain stared at the controls like they no longer belonged to him, overwhelmed by everything that had gone wrong. The girl stepped forward without hesitation, her fear pushed aside by focus. She spoke fast but clearly, cutting through the noise, explaining what systems were still alive and what had only gone silent. She pointed to the remaining engine, reminding them it was still producing power, still capable of keeping them airborne. She explained that the plane was dropping so fast because it was being flown like both engines were dead when one was still fighting. The co-pilot looked up from the checklist, confusion slowly turning into realization. He confirmed what she said. One hydraulic system was still responding, the backup instruments were still alive. The girl guided the captain's hands, telling him to level the nose, to add controlled power, not panic power. The aircraft resisted at first, shaking violently, as if unsure whether to obey. Then slowly, almost unbelievably, the descent began to slow. The screaming alarms faded into the background as the numbers on the instruments stabilized. The captain's breathing steadied, his grip tightened with purpose instead of fear. The girl continued, reminding him to counter the uneven thrust, to balance the plane instead of fighting it. For the first time since the failure, the aircraft responded like a machine that wanted to live. The co-pilot confirmed their heading and available range, realizing they had enough power to reach a nearby airport. Hope returned, not as relief, but as urgency, because now survival depended on every decision made from this moment on. The cockpit transformed from a place of surrender into a place of action. And at the center of it all stood a teenage girl, steady and fearless, guiding two trained pilots back to control. The radio finally came alive, cutting through the tension like a lifeline. The co-pilot declared an emergency, his voice controlled but urgent, explaining the engine failure and their situation. Air traffic control responded instantly, calm and precise, giving them headings, altitudes, and a clear path forward. The girl leaned over the navigation display, calculating distance and time, confirming they had just enough to make it. Outside the cockpit windows, the ground was rising faster now, no longer a threat, but a destination. Emergency crews were already racing into position, lights flashing below like stars on the earth. The captain announced to the cabin that the aircraft was under control and that they were preparing to land. The panic outside softened into stunned silence, then cautious hope. Inside the cockpit, there was no room for celebration, only precision. They ran through the single-engine landing procedure, step by step, every move deliberate. The girl anticipated each action, calling out flap settings, speeds, and reminders before they were even requested. The runway appeared ahead, long, wide, and unforgiving, offering no second chances. The plane trembled as crosswinds pushed against it, testing their control one final time. The captain corrected smoothly, confidence fully restored, trusting the aircraft and the guidance beside him. Seconds stretched endlessly as they descended toward the asphalt. At the final moment, power was reduced, the nose lifted slightly, and the wheels met the runway. The impact was firm but controlled, a sound that instantly replaced terror with disbelief. They were on the ground, rolling safely, alive against all odds. As the plane slowed to a stop, the weight of what had almost happened settled over everyone like a wave. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their flashing lights reflecting off the windows. Inside the cabin, people sat frozen for a moment, struggling to understand that they were still alive. Then emotions poured out all at once: sobs, laughter, shaking breaths, and quiet prayers of gratitude. The captain removed his headset and leaned back in his seat, his hands trembling now from relief instead of fear. He turned toward the girl, his eyes filled with tears he did not try to hide. He told her the truth, that when everything began to fail, he had lost faith in himself. He admitted that without her calm voice and clear thinking, the plane would never have made it to the runway. She shook her head gently, reminding him that he had flown the plane, that he had remembered his training when it mattered most. The co-pilot watched in silence, deeply aware that he had just witnessed something rare. When the cabin doors opened, passengers began to evacuate, faces pale but alive. Some looked toward the cockpit with confusion, others with gratitude they could not yet put into words. One by one, people realized that survival had come from an unexpected place, not from authority or seniority, but from courage and clarity when everything else fell apart. The nightmare was over, but the impact of what had happened would stay with them forever. As the last passengers slid down the emergency exits and stepped onto solid ground, many of them fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the simple feeling of standing still and breathing again. Strangers hugged each other like family, sharing tears with people they had never met just an hour earlier. The girl walked quietly behind them, unnoticed by most, her role hidden beneath the noise of relief and flashing lights. One man stopped her in the aisle, his voice shaking as he thanked her, admitting he had tried to stop her before. Others followed, offering silent nods, trembling smiles, and hands pressed together in gratitude they could barely express. She accepted none of the praise loudly, only smiling softly, knowing that survival was never about recognition. Outside, the night air felt unreal, calm and gentle after the chaos in the sky. The captain stood nearby watching his passengers, alive because someone had refused to give up on him. That flight would be remembered as a near disaster, but also as a reminder that courage does not always come from authority. Sometimes it comes from the person no one notices, the one everyone underestimates. And on that night, at 15,000 feet, a young girl proved that hope does not disappear when things go wrong. It simply waits for someone brave enough to stand up and act.